feature that is really, really useful is the raise hand. If you have any questions or points to be made, and if the host allows, you can just click it, and once you click it, it will be a little hand right beside your name. It will show that you want to make an observation in the end of the presentations without interrupt the speaker. Other than that, any more questions, you can send a message to me, as I said earlier, to Julia on questions about how WebEx works. Other than that, you can send the Q&A questions to Hanin, that is the host. Have a great webinar. And another thing that I would like to say is that this webinar is being recorded for future purposes of sharing the knowledge that we are presenting here. So it's good that you know that. Other than that, have a good webinar.
First of all, I would like to welcome all of you and thank you for taking the time to participate in our session. My name is Hanin Al-Khatib. I am the Programs and Grants Officer at the Arab Foundations Forum, and today I will be assisting in moderating this session, so please feel free to ask me any question at any time. Before we start, I would like to give you a brief introduction and overview. The Arab Foundations Forum, AFF, is a membership nonprofit association of philanthropic foundations in the Arab region. And this webinar is part of a series of webinars that AFF, in collaboration with the John D. Gerhardt Center for Philanthropy and Civic Engagement, will be hosting during this year and next year. These sessions were customized to serve the needs of organizations in the sector based on numerous surveys and needs assessments. And before we start, we would like to extend our welcome to the expert speakers on analyzing data, representing global, international, and regional partner organizations. Our first session will be presented by Ms. Anna Pinho, the Knowledge Management Coordinator at Worldwide Initiatives for Grantmakers Support, on the importance of philanthropy data from a global perspective.
Oh, thanks, Hanin. Just 1 second. Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Hanin, for inviting me to speak today. As Hanin explained, I'll give a brief introduction on the importance of global data and appealing visualization. Before I start, just a little bit about WINGS. WINGS is a global network of associations of grantmakers like the Arab Foundations Forum and support organizations such as the Foundation Center that's with us today as well. We now have over 150 network participants and dues-paying members. You see 140 here, but luckily we are growing by the day. We are now in over 50 countries around the world. So the main role of WINGS is to connect these organizations around the world, offering a peer learning environment and producing or systematizing knowledge and information in the philanthropic sector. Our work with data comes from the understanding that to support the field, we have to understand it. So data is important to draw a picture of the philanthropic field, map its needs and gaps in order to maximize efficiency. So since 2012, we have started collecting information on our members and trying to find ways to best present it. The map you can see here is an example of our latest efforts with a piece of information on our members around the world in all regions. Here are some key findings, some examples from our surveys of our members as our infrastructure organizations on philanthropy. So, WING's members and network participants represent over 22,000 philanthropic organizations around the world. This means corporate foundations, community philanthropy organizations, family foundations, and so on. Our network has a combined budget of almost $140 million. And an interesting fact is that even though most of our members are in Europe and North America, our membership is growing a lot more in regions of Asia Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Arab region. And also, we analyze organizations by their organization type. So membership organizations tend to be a lot smaller than the support organizations. So membership organizations have an average 5 staff, whereas support organizations have 15. And also, by asking our members about the services they provide, we could ask foundations themselves if these services were helpful or not. So here we can see that foundations rate favorably services like information services, peer learning events, and training provided by associations and support organizations. And also, by collecting data, we're able to categorize the work of support organizations into 4 groups. So basically, that's what infrastructure organizations do. And they are about connection, that's building relationships among foundations so they can work together. Building capability, that's building skills and knowledge and training and help them build expertise. And capacity, because sometimes infrastructure organizations also help foundation building resources. And finally, we have credit, that's helping the whole field build a reputation and recognition to the outside world. So now we have started a process to apply this and test this in practice so that infrastructure organizations can evaluate their work and therefore improve the services they provide to foundations. We have also developed a framework to help organizations in general in the work with philanthropy data. So organizations collecting data can establish a transparent relationship with data providers. They can go to data providers and say that they are working using this set of values and principles and that the data they collect will be used in a respectful way towards inclusiveness and openness. This framework of the Global Philanthropy Data Charter also helps organizations that are working with data to collaborate. One of our examples is the Community Foundations Atlas, which will be launched next week, and gathers information about community foundations all around the world. So a group of organizations, including WINGs, just got together and started sharing their data with each other. And that takes a lot of thinking and a lot of conversations about how this information is going to be shared and how it reflects diversity or enable this kind of coordination. So the framework of the data charter helped us think the whole process. And finally, as important as collecting data is finding interesting ways to visualize it so that it's easy for people to find what they're looking for. For instance, on our new membership map, organizations can run and searches according to what they're looking for. So here, we have different types of organizations, and if you want to know which small organizations, let's say with between 150 members and a budget of up to $200,000, are working with conferences and seminars, you can do that with a click of a button, and you can see that these small organizations are in Latin America, and Brazil, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and Europe. We have also started using infographics quite a lot. So this one here on the right is a simple one I have done for Wings Forum, and the number of participants and where they're coming from. And on the left, we have the first version of the map. You saw my first slide. So basically this was our first attempt to collect data on our members. And about 38 to 39 of our members responded. And we were able to build this small infographic with basic information on their budget and how many philanthropic entities they were serving. Encouraged with how we used the information, that was our feedback, that they saw in a visual and simple way what we could do with the information. On the second round of data collection, we had almost 100 of our members replying to our surveys, and we were able to actually build an improved version of the map, as you can see here, with a lot more regional information and global information about philanthropy. So that's a way where good visualization helps us actually gather more information. And I'm sure the next speakers will be talking a bit more about visualization and visualization tools. And Wings uses a specific visualization tool called Pick-to-Chart. And if anyone is interested, I can send the links later. I can send it to Hanin and she can share it with everyone. So thank you very much. And Hanin?
Thank you, Anna. So we're going to move to the second session by Mr. Jake Garcia, the Vice President of Tech Strategy from the Foundation Center, on international databases and mapping tools in the philanthropic sector.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Great, thank you. Hi, thank you, Hanin. As you're saying, I'm the Vice President of Data and Technology Strategy at the Foundation Center. I'll go over a few things about what the Foundation Center is, if you're not familiar with us, and show you some of the visualizations, including this one, which is actually an interactive visualization that we're pretty excited about in one of our new platforms. The Foundation Center, and actually even since I made this slide, these numbers have actually increased. It says here 120,000 global foundations. We actually have information on, I think, more like 130, 140,000 foundations now. And the database is now over 4 million grants. Historically speaking, the Foundation Center was built with a U.S.-centered focus, so we had lots of data on U.S. foundations giving grants to U.S. nonprofits. But since the 1950s, as the grant making has shifted, a lot more grants are being awarded to nonprofits outside the U.S., and obviously there's lots of foundations outside the United States giving grants. We've expanded our scope, and now we're collecting and sharing a lot more data about non-U.S. foundations. In addition, there are a lot of foundations in the U.S. who are also acting, in nonprofits who are acting in places like the Middle East or Sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia that is also being tracked. So our main products, we have Foundation Directory Online, we've got Grant Space, Grant Craft, we've got tons of resources. A lot of them are available, and you can find them via foundationcenter.org. But today I'll focus on the visualization component of the work that we do. So back a couple of years ago, I was the only geographer at the Foundation Center, and my job is to build maps for different applications. In this case, this is washfunders.org. We built this map as part of this. WASH is, for those who aren't familiar with the WASH sector, is water, access, sanitation, and hygiene. And a lot of funders of WASH activities, particularly in Africa, got together and wanted to help other funders figure out best practices for conducting and funding WASH-related projects. That was the Hilton Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and a few others. So in this case, what we're looking at is the color of the countries, where it's lighter colored is where there's poorer access, less access to to good, clean water. And where it gets to be kind of green or dark blue, that shows where the access to water is closer to universal. So we can see that in parts of Africa and the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and in South America, there are parts of where the access to water is pretty low. At the same time, the purple bubbles show the activity from foundations, like where foundations are spending money on water and sanitation projects. So, in a very simple way, you could look at those countries that are, yellowish in color but don't have any bubbles on it. That to me, at least, and to the funders I talk to, represents an opportunity. There aren't any foundations currently active in water and sanitation in this country, and there's a demonstrable need for action there. And we're zoomed in here now on the map a little bit. And by the way, this is available for free online. You can go to watchfunders.org and see it. These bigger yellower bubbles represent government funding, bilateral and multilateral. So it's funding from governments like the U.S., like USAID, or the U.K., their DFID agency, or the World Bank and entities like that. So in almost all cases, bilateral, multilateral funding dwarf funding from foundations. But foundations might be spending $20,000 versus bilateral spending $200 million. It's actually really interesting for bilaterals to see this. Every time I get in front of them and show them, oh, there's a small foundation doing river restoration on this little $10,000 project, they're immediately interested and they want to find out who they are and how they can partner up with them. So we also create these little country profiles, and we do this for other apps too, but this is still Watch Funders and still kind of a good example. In this case, we can see that over the years, in this kind of blue and purple bars, that over the years, $10 million a year maybe roundabout from foundations. But at the bottom, you see the OECD data, and it was over $100 million a year. So again, the scale from bilateral, multilateral is much higher, but there's still is pretty regular activity from foundations. And then these statistics on the left just show the population, the percent of the population has access to an improved water source, that kind of thing. So it helps give kind of an overall snapshot picture of what's going on in Kenya, what's the funding situation like in Kenya. And this is the part about collaborating and decision making, helping foundations find each other, helping them make a decision. Is this the place where we should be spending our funds? And then when it gets down to the very root of it, almost all of our data, not all of it, but I'd say in these visualizations, the core of the data is a grant record. So in this case, on the left side, you can see it's just that's the basic bare bones of a grant record. This is what we've got 4 million of. We have 4+ million grant records that say, from X foundation to Y recipient on this year for this much money, and description and sector coding. And we've got around 30 people on staff whose job it is just to collect and clean and code and evaluate this data to make sure that it's good. And then it goes into our databases. So it's pretty big. Pretty big data cleaning effort, and I haven't met other companies, other nonprofits at our scale that spend that much of the percentage of their time on data cleaning. We also provide some data visualization for aggregate statistics. Foundation stats is one example. It wouldn't be as relevant currently for the for this audience because mostly it focuses on U.S. stuff, but it's a good way of demonstrating how we can show aggregates without having to get down to the nitty-gritty details. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the new platform and why we built what we built. We interviewed a bunch of foundations. So in the Foundation Center, we've got kind of two audiences that we typically serve. One is nonprofits who are seeking grants, and the other is foundations who are trying to figure out how to do what they do, but better. We interview nonprofits all the time because they subscribe to our applications. So we know them pretty well, but foundations are a different kind of creature. They don't, they're not as sensitive nonprofits are always seeking money, for instance, and foundations are not always seeking money. Typically, they're trying to find partners, trying to figure out how to best allocate their money. So I went on site and interviewed 40 people at about 35 different foundations, and found a lot of striking similarities between what they said. They all said, like almost verbatim, that they want to scan the landscape. They all said they want to, or in vast majority said they want to collaborate and find ways to collaborate better. They want ways to vet and discover, who they should be giving money to and who else they might have given. Maybe they're thinking about giving money to nonprofit Z, but they want to find out who else has been giving them funds. And then they also think, well, maybe next year I want to start doing education funding in Jordan, or maybe next year I need to train some new program staff on how to give good grants. And let's look at how the history of grant making went over the last 10 years. So that's why we built Foundation Maps. And actually, when I built this slide deck, Foundation Maps had not yet been launched. So it is actually live right now. It's at maps.foundationcenter.org. And this shows a snapshot as we look at the world view. That's got 4 million grants in the database, amounted to $271 billion. And this view here is just the distribution of the locations of the nonprofit headquarters. So you can see the majority are going to be, or a lot are going to be in the United States, but there's a lot of recipients of grants around the world. And if we zoom in here to the Middle East, you can see there are lots of recipients, a surprising number of recipients in our database in Iraq, but of course in other countries throughout the Middle East as well. You can also, so in this case, I'm looking up, you can also look at foundations and recipients, so the top foundations giving to certain recipients, top recipients giving money from certain foundations. And this is in New York. Let's look at this. These are the top foundations in our database who are giving to organizations based in Jordan. So here we can see that the Ford Foundation, Open Society Institute, Open Society Foundations, which is kind of the same institution, depending how you look at it. Annenberg, National Endowment for Democracy, etc. And these are aggregate totals. But this is the kind of activity that people want to find out. Who are the top funders giving to folks in my country? And who are the top recipients? In our database, the top recipients are New Development, Community Media Network, Arab Foundations Forum, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, etc. And you can go in, drill in, and explore the grants in there. You can also see trend charts, see how funding is going over time for certain different subjects. This is important if you're trying to say, look, funding for education is going down. I don't know what's going on. Like everything else is going up, this is going down. And we found that a lot of folks, especially where there's lots of data and you see real genuine trends, that it's a very important thing to help communicate. That even within a program, within a foundation, to say, look, our education funding should be going up, but it's going down, but look, our health funding is going up. And why isn't my program doing as well as it should? Demographics, this is an interesting piece for in the U.S. And it can be applied to anywhere outside the U.S. as long as we actually have the data. In this case, this is showing the Asian population in a city in the United States, and you can draw shape and get some pretty good information about that place. So in this case, I can draw a shape on the map and then get the different ethnic breakdown in that area. It's kind of an advanced feature. We don't have this. This is like a few city blocks. Each one of these polygons is pretty small. But if we were to get data this granular for another country, then we can just apply it and throw it in here, and then the same feature would be available. But this is helpful when saying, I really want to get down to this one particular neighborhood, and I'm the only one who knows how to define this neighborhood, and I'll draw my shape on the map and then get the readout. And then finally, the collaboration stuff. This is called Pathways. This is where you pick a foundation or a nonprofit, and you pick a subject, and you say, who have they given money to? Who else gave them money? You can follow the money. In the U.S., we call it the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but it's different places what the cliche is about these kind of connections. But it's like imagine like Facebook or LinkedIn or other social networks, but instead of it being a social network, it's a network of based upon a grant-making relationship. So it's not a human friendship. It's the fact that a foundation gave money to XY nonprofit. So if we limited, and here in orange are nonprofits in Jordan, and we started with one of them, let's say the Community Media Network. Well, who are their funders who have also given money to other people in other nonprofits in Jordan? Well, we've got National Endowment for Democracy and Open Society Institute. Among these two, who did they give money to? So it's got their top recipients over here. Who else gave money to these nonprofits but who did not give to Community Media Network? So for Community Media Network, they might say, Ford Foundation, Arab Human Rights Fund, Global Fund for Women, these guys gave to my competition essentially, but didn't give to me. Maybe this is a good way to connect with them. This is something that maybe we should be able to be in contact about. And very last, this is a prototype we're working out soon. It's kind of like the Pathways thing. So I'll back up one slide. It's kind of like Pathways, which is pretty cool, but you have to start with one institution and kind of keep going outwards. This thing that we're going to call Constellations shows, what if I didn't start with any foundation? What if I said, give me water and sanitation in, I think this is water and sanitation in Ghana. You could say, what about health education or health in Jordan? Or you could say, just give me everything in Jordan. And you can see who's connected and who's not connected. So some of these little outliers, we can just identify them quickly, and who's kind of central to everything would be made a lot more obvious. Every time we show this to foundations or groups of foundations in the same room, they get very excited because this is the kind of thing that they know intuitively, but showing them this level of detail with it brings a lot of aha moments, like, oh, that's right. Oh, I forgot about those guys. Or at least one or two things will show up that they didn't quite realize. So that's it for my segment. You can email me at jkg@foundationcenter.org. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Haneen.
Thank you, Jake. I would like to introduce our third speaker, Ms. Kristen Dobson, the Program Director for Research and Policy from the International Human Rights Funders Group, who will be giving a session on visualizing a sector-related international cause.
And good morning, everyone. As Haneen mentioned, I'm going to start by sharing an example of one sector analyzing visualizing data. And this sector is the field of human rights philanthropy. So I want to start by providing some brief background on the initiative and then delve into some of the tools that we've created, what our visualizations look like, and then some of the challenges and questions that we grappled with in engaging in this type of data analysis and visualization. So I'm going to speak about what we're calling our Advancing Human Rights Knowledge Tools for Funders initiative. And this is a collaboration between the International Human Rights Funders Group and the Foundation Center, where Jake, who just spoke, works. And as well, it's in collaboration with Ariadne, which is the European Funders for Social Change and Human Rights, and the International Network of Women's Funds. Very quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the International Human Rights Funders Group, we are a network of donors similar to the Arab Foundations Forum. We are a global network of donors committed to advancing human rights. We have over 330 foundation members across the globe and about 1,300 individual participants, most of whom are staff at those foundations. So what is our Advancing Human Rights Knowledge Tools for Funders initiative? This is an initiative we started over 5 years ago when we were thinking about the questions of how as a network can we work to ensure that human rights grant making is more strategic and effective without having a sense of what the landscape looks like. So we launched this partnership with the Foundation Center to analyze how much funding is going to support human rights, where it's going, and then to create interactive data and research tools that will help funders in their work and help human rights advocates increase their effectiveness. A few other things that objectives of the initiative are to increase knowledge about global human rights funding, facilitate more strategic and effective decision making, and promote coordination, collaboration, and transparency within the field. I'm not going to delve too much into our methodology, but just to explain very briefly how we went about this research is we brought together a committee of human rights funders to define what is it that we mean when we say human rights grant making. And so they came up with a definition that has 3 core principles. One is that it is grant making in pursuit of structural change, usually to support marginalized populations and to advance rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and subsequent human rights covenants and conventions. And so then we took all of the codes that the Foundation Center currently used to code grants, and we matched it with that definition to identify where there were some gaps, where we added codes, and then ran all of the funder data that we received through that definition to determine which grants were human rights or not. Through this process, we've created 4 tools to date. And I'll briefly touch on each of these tools and then go a little more in depth into one of them, which is the primary visualization tool that we created. So the first is an infographic. That was, the advantage of the infographic was it was meant to show a lot of data on just one tool, give a quick picture of what is happening within the human rights grant-making landscape. We also launched a series of reports that had both a qualitative and quantitative analysis of the state of the field. The third tool is a public website that's an interactive site that both funders and advocates can use to get a sense of where funding is going, and that's the tool that I'll demo in just a minute or two. And then the fourth is we created a custom version of the tool that Jake just shared with you, Foundation Maps. So we have a map that is available to human rights funders to get a sense of what's happening in the field. So to show you the first visualization that we created, this is the infographic that I mentioned. So you can see very quickly that in 2011, there were 745 foundations based in 34 countries that made over 17,000 grants totaling $1.7 billion US. So this tool is meant to very quickly show you what the breakdown of funding is by region, issues within each of those regions, and then total dollars for each region. As I also mentioned, we created a series of reports, and we recently, just in July, launched our analysis of human rights funding in 2011. And then we created this Advancing Human Rights website. And this is the tool that I'm going to show you just in a little bit greater depth. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So just a minute. Okay, so everyone should be able to see the main page of the site. So Advancing Human Rights website, which is a tool that's publicly available to anyone. And so you can quickly see this is showing you funding is going to each region. So if you click on North Africa and the Middle East, in 2011, we tracked $78 million in support of human rights. If you scroll down, you'll have an interactive feature that enables you to choose each different issue. So for example, if we click on labor rights, we can see how much is going to support labor rights, the number of grants. You can also look at who the population focus is. So for example, and refugees. And then this is just at the other visualization to enable you to access each of these areas. So if we wanted to learn more about human rights funding for North Africa and the Middle East, if you click on More, it will take you to another visualization which shows you quickly that North Africa and the Middle East in 2011 received 5% of all human rights funding. It's a list of the top donors to the region, top 3 issues funded, top 3 populations funded, and then also provide some sample grants and authored case studies. So one advantage of this tool is that it offers 3 different ways that you can view the information. So there's the region view, and there's a view where you can look by issues. You can quickly compare across issues, which issues are receiving the most support. And then there's the view by population as well. And each of these will take you into a more specific visualization screen, these children and youth. So I'm very happy to share additional information about this tool, but I'll go back now just to explain a little bit more about some of the challenges that we grappled with. But first, I want to share just a couple of ways that funders are using these tools. So one is to better understand funding for specific human rights issues. Another, identify potential grantees and funding partners. So one example is one of our members shared that they were interested in funding human rights in Turkey, but they didn't have experience funding in that context. So they used the human rights version of Foundation Maps that we created to get within 2 minutes a very quick picture of who was already funding human rights in Turkey and which organizations were already being funded. Another way that foundations are using this information is to inform their strategic planning. So the Open Society Foundations, for example, when they developed their new human rights funding strategy, they used these tools, both our analysis and visualizations, to inform the direction that they were going to move the program. So the challenges that we faced. One of the biggest challenges for us with this project is balancing transparency and grantee safety. So recognizing the importance of human rights philanthropy being transparent about what is being funded and where, but more importantly, ensuring that the organizations being supported for their work are protected. So one of the main strategies that we used to address this challenge was allowing, when funders submitted data to us, that any grants they felt were sensitive to just say the grantee was anonymous and provide very basic information. So perhaps saying a grant to an anonymous grantee in Russia, where there's no detail about what the issue is, but we can still track that funding. We also allowed funders to submit data to us anonymously. So if they didn't want to be seen as a human rights funder, or they didn't want to be linked exactly to the grants that they were making for whatever reason, they were also able to submit anonymously. Another area that we face some challenges is different cultures of philanthropy. So as this research is global in nature, we found that there are various different philanthropic models across the globe. And so right now we've been tracking foundation support for human rights, but foundations look very different depending on what context you're based. And so that is something that we found it's been easier to access data in some countries due to either there's a tradition of submitting data and there's already an existing culture of transparency around that, or there may be laws in place where foundations are required to submit their information publicly. So that is another one of the challenges that we encountered. And then the third is just differing understandings of human rights. So in some contexts, it makes more sense to understand this work as funding in support of social change in human rights. In others, social justice language has resonated more closely. So we've encouraged funders to focus specifically on the issues that we're tracking, and if those are issues that they're interested in or that they focus on. A couple of quick questions and tips if you are considering engaging in a data visualization. So the questions, some of the things we asked ourselves, what story is it that we want to tell? Who is our audience? What information will we visualize? And what type of visual will best convey our message? Two tips that we found were really important for us is, one, working with members of our target audience throughout the data visualization process. So we work with a committee comprised of human rights funders that helps us think through what information is it that we want to visualize, what makes more sense to be in text format, what makes more sense to be in an infographic format, what might make more sense as a map, and then they essentially help us think through some of the challenges that we're grappling with as well. And then they also help us engage in user testing. So as funders are our primary audience for these tools, once we have an initial design, by playing around with that and exploring those tools, they can provide us with feedback that allows us to improve the tools before we launch them publicly. And just to give you a quick sense of what's next for this project, we're also going to start tracking strategies supported within human rights funding. We're going to start analyzing and visualizing bilateral and multilateral support for human rights. Next year, we'll release both our 2012 and 2013 analyses. And then we're also going to be thinking about how to visualize trends within human rights funding. So I'm very happy to, if anyone is considering visualizing data and they want to speak with an organization that has been doing that for a while, I'm very happy to be a resource. And Haneen, I'm sure will send my email address around after the call, but I'll go ahead and stop there. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kristen. So at the fourth and final session, I will leave you with Mr. Ahmad Barclay, Research and Production Partner from Visualizing Impact, with a highlight on visualizing a region and sector-related cause with examples, tips, and recommendations.
Thank you, Haneen. I should say that the presentation, I mean, in terms of tips and things like this, I think it would be good to bring during the Q&A, but I guess I'll just try to give an overview in the presentation of the kind of work that we do and from a perspective of the issues and the people who receive the work and how they use it. So I think we basically, we were going to try and play a short video to show kind of what the organization, what we do. I think Haneen needs to play the video maybe.
Haneen?
Hello?
I think you need to play the video for the visualizing impact.
I'm working on getting the video.
Okay.
Just a second.
Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I am sorry, some of the attendees were unable to view the video, so I will be sure to send it along with the presentations and the different materials.
Okay, so thank you, Hanin. Perhaps next time if I do one of these, maybe it'll be without a video. So if I bring up the our presentation. So visualizing Palestine is basically a pilot project of visualizing impact. So I'm using it as a case study to explain the kind of work we do and the issues we're involved with. So basically we create data-driven visuals to communicate complex and marginalized social issues to a broad audience. So the idea is that there are many reports. This is our team. So it gives an idea of the kind of skills involved. So it's very broad, from design, technology, research, storytelling, communication, and many other things that we try to bring together into the work that we do, which we talk about as visual storytelling, data-driven visual storytelling. And here are some of the clients and partners we've worked with on the issue of Palestine specifically. Just to give an idea of the context of Palestine, basically between 2008, 2012, Palestine, Israel ranked joint number 2 out of 96 regions reported on by Human Rights Watch. So that's one example of it being a very reported on region. So there's not a lack of data available. So the issue is not necessarily collecting data, but it's how do you communicate that data? And for this, we've basically as a group of people, we came to the idea of infographics as a mode to kind of communicate to a wide audience narratives based on this information. This was our first attempt at process. This developed into conceptually the way we go through the process of developing our infographics. This is available online, so I won't go into too much detail. And this was supposed to be the more detailed process, which doesn't seem to have come up in this. Now, I wanted to give a couple of examples of projects we've worked on, infographics, visual stories. This is to give an idea of the media environment around the recent attacks on Gaza. Basically, looking to North America, 57% of the Americans supported the latest military operation in the Gaza Strip. And to give also an example of how, basically the kind of official Israeli government line finds its way into mainstream media outlets, particularly in the West. So this is an example of some of the how the data from, if you look at the chart at the bottom of here, and also from the BBC as well, there's this kind of false parity created by comparing the number of total rockets fired out of Gaza with the number of targets in Gaza that specifically have been hit by Israeli airstrikes. So it's like creating a false parity, and the source is directly from the Israeli Defense Forces. Another strange thing here is actually that the data that's shown by the BBC and The Economist, the numbers aren't actually the same, although the source is the IDF in both cases. Now, so what we're trying to do is take a step back and look at a wider context. So some of the things that we released during the recent Gaza invasion was, this was an updated version of a graphic we did a while ago, which was comparing the Israeli and Palestinian deaths over time, and also looking at, what does it mean to have a ceasefire and who violates the ceasefire. So you can see the kind of disparity in the violations of the previous ceasefire, even during the period of relative calm before the invasion. So you can see there's a big misbalance in terms of the deadliness as well as just the number of violations. And then you can I just wanted to give an idea of, when we create these visuals, how they get shared. So this one was purely released through social media. So you can give an idea of, just on Facebook, this one post reached 37,000 people, and an idea of, where these people are being reached. So in the US, Palestine, United Kingdom, Jordan, Netherlands. So it's reaching people on, both sides of the Atlantic and in this region. And then an idea of just, we try to understand using, Google image search, where these images are appearing. So this is just a capture to show. I mean, a lot of these will be on social media accounts, but also on blogs, sometimes on mainstream media that these are appearing. Just very quickly through two other examples of infographics that we've produced. So this is giving an example of when just an extreme number and how to visualize that in terms that people can understand. So 25,000 is just a number. So we kind of looked to examples online of how people were visualizing huge numbers of unfathomable numbers. And we began to look at ways that we could bring this number up to scale, and we basically came up with the idea of showing what those kinds of demand should look like, and showing how different statistics over time build up into this bigger picture of ultimately of displacement. So it's not just about destruction. So this is one example. Another one is a very different kind of graphic, and this was based on a story about Palestinians trying to ride an Israeli settler bus to Jerusalem and being ejected because they don't have the right permit to cross the wall, basically, into Jerusalem. And it made us interested in what other buses go to these destinations. So just searching on an online site, we were able to find all the registered buses that pass through Jerusalem, to plot those on a map, to understand which of those go into the occupied West Bank. And then to diagrammatize those buses that do pass into that area, and to kind of create this story showing how not only are these settlements connected, seamlessly into Israel proper, as it were, but also on the other side, both sides of the separation wall, so that although the wall separates Palestinians from going to Jerusalem, it obviously doesn't separate settlers. So this is kind of building up this, adding this context. And a quick idea about this kind of work and how it's being picked up online and offline. So as well as through social media. Oh, sorry, I skipped also in terms of the interest that there is in this. We've translated graphics into 11 languages purely on the basis of people requesting that we bring it into those languages and doing the translations on our behalf. So there's kind of a demand, a grassroots demand for this kind of work in many contexts, and how it's getting picked up in some of the more recognizable media as well. So in The Guardian, a blog on the Washington Post, Fast Company, which is a blog relating to the design world. So it's just to give an idea of how this stuff, infographics on social issues, are of interest to people beyond the kind of places that you would imagine, if they're brought to people in a way that can kind of connect on different levels. So that's kind of to wrap up what I was going to talk about. So I can leave the rest for the question and answer, and just to show also the offline use. So this is the final segment. So they've been used, and again, this is people approaching us to make use of work. So UK government officials is one example. They've been used subway billboards in Washington, DC, and actually on the ground as well by a group called EWASH, who is a group of NGOs working on WASH issues in the West Bank and Gaza. So that's actually the end of the presentation. So I can take any questions in the Q&A session on more specifics. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad, for that. Before we go ahead to the Q&A, I'm going to give it to my colleague, Muhammad Al-Azraq.
Thank you, Haneen, and thank you, everyone, for these really wonderful presentations. I just wanted to, well, also kickstart the Q&A session, but also just kind of backtrack and say, like, what is this session about, and why did we want to do something now on visualizing philanthropy? And as you saw, that the first three speakers were mostly directed towards sectoral issues, looking at the sector, foundation, and spending, and where is the fund going, mapping the world, and creating visual tools that are helpful for both foundations and also nonprofits. I want to make sure that everyone hears me well. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Mo.
Because I tried to log in and I couldn't. Would you please let us know a little bit?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways we could do that. The first one is that there's going to be, starting in about 2 weeks, there's going to be a free version where you just sign up and you get free, but it has very limited access. So you get all the data's in there, but you don't get to see all the details of the data, and don't get to see all the fancy kind of the funner kind of utilities, mostly the map, and you can use the filters. However, we are letting people sign up for what we're calling our first look group. And the first look group will get occasional free trials, meaning like a 1 week free trial in, let's say, early November, or a 1 week free trial in like early January, that kind of thing, because we want to kind of test out new features. So you can email me at jkg@foundationcenter.org or email us at maps@foundationcenter.org and ask to be put on the first look group. Or just stay tuned. In a couple of weeks, there will be again the free one where you can at least just kick the tires on it for the map and just make sure there's enough data that's relevant to you.
Thanks. I'll definitely be emailing you. My other quick question is more to all our presenters, and please feel free to chime in whichever way you think is appropriate. Basically, like all of you seem to be proponents of the visualizing information and sort of transforming what we have as raw data into more visuals. We're like beyond, maybe like sort of beyond the sharing on social media, what do you think the impact like sort of that has had on your work? Like basically like how kind of, if there was any sort of measuring the outreach and the spread of such information? Like, how would you how would you feel like between producing raw data that is presented in numbers and words and making visuals? Like, how would you feel like the social impact and the kind of the transformation of that happen? I don't know if my question is clear. Hello? Hello?
Or is that directed to me?
Ahmad, I think that's a good question for you.
Okay. I didn't know it was directed broadly to the panel or to specific. So, I mean, for us, I think that there's a need for the visuals are kind of an anchor to the story. So, I don't think you can read a visual out of context, but it brings you a little bit closer to understanding and makes you want to understand more. So that's kind of where I think the visuals, at least that we produce, come into things. We don't really provide heavy data. We provide stories through data, basically.
Thank you, Ahmad. Again, if anybody has any question, please send it to me and I will read it out to the speaker. I have a question to Ahmad. I've received a question with what recommendations from your experience do you have to give people who are trying to use data into visuals, what to take into consideration?
I think it's a very good question. It's something that I mean the way we've worked, we found to be more of a kind of art than a science. But I think the idea of a story and an argument that you're trying to make through the graphic in terms of the kind of work that we're trying to do, and I think it can be relevant to pure data visualization on a level that basically you're trying to say what is the kind of the smallest subset of data that people need in order to understand an issue, and what is the narrative that they need in order to kind of flow through the necessary data that they need to understand. So it's kind of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 steps to understanding, what is this issue, what is the shape of it, and why is it relevant. And I think it's probably the same logic you'd apply to a short op-ed, for example. So that's the best way I could kind of contextualize it.
Thank you, Ahmad. I have a question from Christen. Christen, do you like to ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It wasn't a question. I was actually going to respond to the earlier question, and I think I was double muted somehow. But the question about the benefits of visualization, and I would just share from our experience, it's really been making complicated easy to understand and very accessible. So as people learn in different ways, we found that putting information into visuals makes it much more likely that both of our sets of audiences, funders and advocates within the human rights field, it increases the likelihood that they'll actually digest the information. So as opposed to producing a report that's over 100 pages, which we did do, at the same time, we also made that information available through, an infographic and very quick visuals, and have found that those visuals have made it more likely that the data is understood and used.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. If you have any more questions, I would gladly read them out loud. Or you can raise your hand.
Haneen, I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. This is Naila Farouki. I'm the CEO and Executive Director at AFF. I actually have 2 questions, one for Jake and one for Ahmad. And actually, anybody can chime in. Any of the speakers, please, chime in and answer this if you can. But Jake, I specifically wanted to ask if you could address just some of the difficulties that you've had in gathering the kind of data that you're using, in mapping that data, and if you have any tips for foundations and for organizations on how, or at least for organizations that are looking to share that data, what is a good way to go about that? What are the kinds of questions that the organizations need to ask themselves in terms of why that data is important to be shared and why it's important for that data, whether it's to be regional or to be globally shared? Because I'm just curious, there's been a lot of global conversations around this issue, the difficulty in finding data, the difficulty in gathering it, and then the difficulty in visualizing it. So I'm just curious to know what you guys have encountered and how you sort of overcome that.
It's a great question, great bunch of questions. I'll try to be brief on them, but the main thing is that, for the United States, for United States-based funders, the main way we've been able to get data at the beginning of the Foundation Center's, history was through tax forms. So in the United States, the tax forms actually show a lot of the grant making done by foundations, by private and independent foundations. But it doesn't give a lot of detail, and it's also a little bit old. So it's always about 2 years old by the time you get it. However, at least it was kind of clean. So we start to talk about funding from foundations outside the United States, and that you want to get data that's more recent, you actually have to get data directly from the foundations themselves. And that is, the benefit is, well, people can start showing what their data is. They can avoid having to make their own maps. We've got one program called our eGrant Reporter program, which I'd be happy to send around information about. And that's a way for, if foundations give us their data directly, we create a version of foundation maps just with their grant data on it. So it just has them on the map. And that's one benefit of doing it. And it's also a way to make sure that if we got their data somewhere else, it wouldn't be misrepresented. But another good way to do it, and maybe Kristen could talk about this, is that when there's a group of funders who've got a similar cause, like human rights, for instance, and then some members will contribute their data, there will be some members who didn't contribute their data, and then they start to see the progress of the map, and they say, hey, wait, where's my data? And he said, you didn't give it to us. So it kind of compels peer groups to contribute more information, and that's really the driver of helping get the data in. And then, but lastly, I mean, it's a pretty simple one, but for the kind of data that I'm mostly working with, it's relatively quantitative. We're not making too much of an argument. We're not really trying to convince anybody any specific thing, but it really needs to be, a few fields need to be there. Who gave the money, who received the money, where they're located, where the area served is, a description, and a dollar amount. And that's about it. So it sounds simple, but it's actually hard for a foundation to get that together. But again, the way that most of the time they're compelled to do it is when they're in a peer group of other funders who together want to make sure they're all showing up on the map. Kristen, can I pass the baton to you for that?
Absolutely. So exactly what Jake was saying, what we've done is we've reached out to our members as part of our network and asked them to share data with us. So for us, it's really been through relationships, and it's one-on-one. We send individualized emails to every single one of our members. We have follow-up phone conversations with them. We help them think about how can they pull that information together internally if it's something that they don't have experience doing before. Also through our partnerships with Ariadne, the European Human Rights Funders and Social Change Network, and the International Network of Women's Funds, they all ask their members that they have relationships with for data. So it's really been through doing the one-on-one outreach and very personalized support. It's also been through a lot of time on showing the tools that we create to funders in person. So we go to foundation offices and do presentations with their team and think about how can they strategically use this data in support of their work. And if they haven't already submitted, they really see the value through those conversations, and then they start to submit data. And then just a third piece is that we also do a lot of presentations at funder conferences. So once they see the tools, they see how they're being used and how they might be able to use them in support of their work, it's a catalyst to submit data themselves.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. That's actually very helpful. Because I'm just curious if you could tell me a little bit about what do you feel tends to be the biggest impediment to this? Is it a question of people not being sure how the data is going to be used? Is it a question of trust? Do you think it matters when it comes to the money amounts? Do you think it matters whether it's the sensitivity of the subject matter itself, or is it the question of the money and that's kind of the trust of, you know, revealing the accountability and the transparency issues? And I ask that because in the Arab region, there's a very different understanding of what accountability and transparency means. And I think this is one of the things that we're struggling with, at least our organization, AFF, when we try to talk about, well, first of all, we were trying to contribute data to all of these initiatives that are happening around the world, and specifically with the Foundation Center, with the UNDP, with other UN foundations or organizations. We're finding that the language that is being used to define what is accountability and what is transparency, it's a different taxonomy depending on the region, right? And so we don't all fit into the same paradigms. And I'm trying to figure out a way to be able to encourage our region to be more data forthcoming without stepping on, you know, without, or rather while maintaining respect for the kind of the context, the cultural context for why those things may not be shared. So I'm just curious to know from your experience, what has been the biggest reason for, you know, for if there have been impediments to gathering that data, what they've been because of?
Absolutely. It's a great question that you to really constantly think about. From our experience, I would say one of the biggest barriers has been just the staff time and capacity it takes to pull that data together internally if a foundation has not been tracking it in a way that's kind of easy for them to send it to us. And we've found that's the case with some smaller foundations. And so if we send the request, you know, the response might be, we see the value in this research, but we just don't have the capacity to do this. But when we've provided the support and worked with foundations on this, we've actually received feedback that this has been very helpful for them in aligning their internal systems and starting to track this information in a more systematic way. So that would be one challenge. And the second is what you referenced, the sensitivity of the subject matter. You know, within the human rights space, there's definitely concerns about sharing the names of grantees, sharing that they're funding particular issues. So as I mentioned before, one of the things we did is you're able to submit by saying the grantee is anonymous. You're able to submit by only sharing country-level information. You as a funder can call yourself anonymous if you're concerned about that. And that's an area we found that there are different concerns also based on the region in which the funder is based. As you said, kind of different language and understanding around transparency and accountability. And it's something we've seen, for example, in the European context. There have been more concerns from funders about sharing their data publicly, as opposed to the US context, where foundations have had to share their data publicly because of you know, legal requirements for a very long time. And so the number one thing that we have prioritized is just working with funders, saying, okay, what is the value of these tools and this information? How can it support your work? And then how can we make it work for you to participate? So it really comes down to a lot of the individualized conversation and relationship and building that trust. If, you know, hopefully that's helpful.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. Okay, can I just ask Ahmad a question as well? I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the challenges that maybe you find in visualizing this data. What, if any, part of the story do you think goes missing? And is there a fear that visualizing it in the way that you know, like infographics or whatever, does that oversimplify? Does it reduce the story to something that may not be necessarily telling the full picture? I'm just curious again about what the challenges are when you go this route.
Sure. I think that's a very good question. I think in terms of the challenge of getting data, there's no lack of data. So if you know, I guess if you follow the issues that are being reported, then there's tons of information on every subject that's being reported. But I guess it's the things that are being underreported that we realize are quite important issues. And also the nature of the way in which organizations report the data. So for example, in the case of Palestine, although I guess there might be analogous issues elsewhere, a lot of the issues faced, you know, cross between different regions that tend to be reported separately. So you've got the issue of the West Bank and Gaza, but also Palestinians in Israel. You've got Palestinians, you know, refugees in neighboring countries in the diaspora. And some issues cross, you know, over these different groups of people, but aren't reported in such a way. So you're really trying to pull together different kinds of information. Now, in terms of, you know, oversimplification, I think there's definitely a risk of that. And I think for that reason, I mean, we see the graphics as a way into the issue. We provide, you know, always the sources that we've used. You know, on the graphics, and also when we release them, we try to reach out to blogs and to media, and also to frame the issues ourselves through the kind of media and press releases we do with each of the graphics that we publish. So it's not simply, you know, the infographics don't tend to get published in isolation.
Right, so they have supporting, like there's supporting documentation to go along with it.
Definitely, exactly, and I think that they're always, I would personally anyway see them as a kind of a window into an issue. You know, so you get this big picture idea, but you're encouraged to, you know, find go back to the original sources, to read the context. So
right.
I think that's the best way I can explain.
And do you guys specifically at Visualizing Impact, do you have any way of tracking whether or not people actually go ahead and delve a little bit deeper? Do you have any way to track clicks on any of the links or anything like that? I mean, is there a way to understand how effective the infographics are at pushing people to delve deeper into the issues? Or how do you track that?
Yeah, that's something that's a bit more tricky to follow. It's like specifically the issue of whether people go to the sources. We do provide them as hyperlinks. But that's only on when people see the graphic on the web page, and it's not actually something we've tracked directly. But definitely, in terms of understanding whether people find the graphics useful, I think we can understand through, you know, their reuse, the fact that people are using them online and offline to explain the issues. So there's this kind of way of tracking to understand that people are using these graphics to give context. And I think in that sense that they're not necessarily bringing people directly to the sources, but people are finding them, you know, who already know something about the subject, are finding them useful as a tool to explain that subject.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much.
So I have a comment from Anna because she's unable to use her microphone regarding the question on the matter of sharing information and getting data regarding accountability of grant makers and institutions. She wanted me to mention the initiative of the data charter itself because it deals with all of the concepts of data sharing and so on, and deals with compromise and trust amongst institutions, as well as methodology of utilization of data in a way that institutions can trust more on sharing their information in order to make studies of the field and reports, which is done in collaboration with the Foundation Center. So does anybody else have questions or anything to add? Well, I would like to thank all of the speakers today and our partners, the Gerhardt Center and Wings, for hosting this webinar. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the participants. We will make sure to send you all of the information, links, and details of the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.